Let me ask you a question. Where do you draw the line between unconditional family love and unforgivable betrayal? Is there a point where the blood in your veins is no longer a good enough excuse for the knife in your back? My name is Sarah. I am a 29-year-old ER nurse, and a few weeks ago, I learned the exact price my family put on my loyalty. The answer, as it turns out, was the price of a luxury vacation to Dubai and a shiny new convertible for my younger sister, Chloe. But I did not find that out through a tearful confession or a guilty apology. I found out the hard way by pulling into my own driveway. It was a Tuesday morning. I had just come off a brutal 14-hour night shift at the hospital emergency room. My feet were aching, my scrubs smelled faintly of harsh antiseptic and stale coffee, and my brain felt like it was wrapped in thick fog. All I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep for 2 days straight. But I was not driving back to my cramped downtown apartment. Instead, I was heading out to the quiet, tree-lined suburbs, specifically to the beautiful, sprawling craftsman house that my grandmother, Eleanor, had left exclusively to me when she passed away 2 years ago. I had a very specific reason for going there that morning, despite my exhaustion. Resting carefully on the passenger seat beside me, wrapped securely in moving blankets, was my grandmother's antique mantel clock. It had been broken for over a decade, sitting silent in her living room. I had just spent a small fortune and waited 4 months to have it meticulously restored by a specialist. Bringing it back to her house felt like a private little ceremony to me. It was a way of keeping her memory ticking in the place she loved most, the only place in the world that had ever truly felt like a safe haven for me when I was growing up. But that warm, nostalgic feeling evaporated the absolute second I turned onto her street. As I pulled up to the familiar wrought iron gate, my foot slammed on the brake pedal instinctively. There was a massive white moving truck backed straight up into the driveway. Two strange vehicles, large luxury SUVs, were parked haphazardly on the front lawn, their heavy tires crushing the beautiful hydrangeas my grandmother had spent years patiently cultivating. I sat there in the driver's seat, the engine idling loudly, my exhausted brain struggling to process the visual information in front of me. My first panicked thought was that the house was being robbed in broad daylight. My second, slightly more rational thought was that someone had given a moving company the completely wrong residential address. I killed the engine, left the clock sitting securely in the car, and walked briskly up the paved stone walkway. My heart was thumping so hard against my ribs I could hear it in my ears, driven purely by a sudden spike of adrenaline. The heavy oak front door was propped wide open. A couple of movers in matching blue t-shirts were carrying a massive, modern sectional sofa right through the entryway, scraping it dangerously close to the original door frame. I stepped up onto the porch, ignoring my fatigue, and cleared my throat loudly. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sharp and projecting over the noise of the moving truck. "What exactly is going on here? Who authorized you to be inside this property?" A man in his late 40s, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly stressed out, walked out of the kitchen hallway. He paused, gave me a quick, dismissive up and down, probably taking in my wrinkled medical scrubs and messy bun, and frowned in deep annoyance. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. I crossed my arms, digging my fingernails into my own skin to stop my hands from visibly shaking. "I am the legal owner of this property," I said, making sure every word was crystal clear. "I need you to tell me why you are moving strangers' furniture into my house, or I am calling the police department right this second." The man stopped walking. The annoyance on his face vanished, instantly replaced by genuine, deep confusion. He looked down at the paperwork clipped to his board, then looked back up at me, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am," he said slowly, speaking to me like I was deeply confused. "I do not know who you are, or what kind of scam you are trying to pull, but you are not the owner of this property. My wife and I just closed on this house 3 weeks ago. We received the keys directly from the escrow agent yesterday. The world completely stopped spinning. The morning birds stopped chirping. I felt a freezing cold sweat break out across the back of my neck and trickle down my spine. I shook my head, taking a step back as if he had physically pushed me. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "That is impossible. This house was left to me by my grandmother. The deed is entirely in my name. Sarah." The man sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was dealing with an unstable person who had wandered off the street. "Look, I do not know anything about your grandmother, but the title search was completely clear. We bought this place fair and square from the previous owner, a guy named Richard. He handled the entire closing process for the family. Richard, my father." Hearing his name casually drop out of a stranger's mouth while standing in the middle of my grandmother's foyer hit me like a physical punch straight to the gut. All the air violently left my lungs. I stood there, absolutely paralyzed, as the puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with a horrifying, sickening speed. The house, the deed, my dad. And right at that exact agonizing moment, as if the universe had a sick sense of humor, my cell phone started buzzing intensely in my scrub pocket. I pulled it out with trembling, numb fingers. The caller ID flashed brightly on the screen. It was my dad. I stared down at the glowing screen. Then I looked up at the stranger standing defensively in my house. My thumb hovered over the glass, and for a reason I still cannot fully explain, I answered the call and pressed it to my ear. "Sarah, sweetie!" My dad's voice boomed through the speaker, sickeningly cheerful and entirely casual. "Morning. I know you just got off your hospital shift and you are probably dead on your feet, but your mother and I were wondering if you wanted to come over to the house for dinner tonight. We are throwing a little celebration." "Celebrating what?" I asked. My voice did not even sound human. It sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "Oh, just some fantastic news," he said smoothly, playing his part to absolute perfection. "Chloe got some unexpected financial backing for her social media brand, so she is finally booking that luxury Dubai trip she has been crying about. Plus, she is looking at a new car today. We are ordering Italian food to celebrate her big break. You really should come. It is a big day for the family." He was testing the waters. He was calling to check my temperature, to see if I had discovered the horrific truth yet, cowardly hiding his guilt behind an invitation for baked ziti. I looked at the man with the clipboard, who was now watching me with a mixture of pity and deep suspicion, clearly wondering if he needed to call security. I looked at the empty space on the brick fireplace mantel where I was supposed to place my grandmother's restored clock. I did not scream into the phone. I did not curse at him. I did not demand to know how he could sell my soul for a vacation package. I just took a deep, shaky breath, letting the icy rage finally settle into my bones, and said, "I will be right there, Dad." And I ended the call. I did not say another single word to the man standing in the doorway. I slowly turned around, walked down the porch steps, and got back into my car. I looked over at the antique clock on the passenger seat. Through the protective blankets, I could hear its restored pendulum finally swinging again, keeping perfect, steady time. My own time as a dutiful, quiet, compliant daughter was officially up. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white, threw the car into reverse, and headed straight for my parents' house. I was about to walk right into a celebration that was paid for with my stolen inheritance, and I was fully prepared to burn their entire delusional world right to the ground. The drive from my grandmother's neighborhood to my parents' immaculate suburban subdivision was a blur of manicured lawns and mounting nausea. I do not remember stopping at red lights. I do not remember the radio playing. All I could hear was the steady, deafening roar of my own heartbeat, drowning out everything else. When I finally pulled into their driveway, the sheer audacity of the scene almost made me laugh. Everything looked so painfully normal. The sprinklers were doing their rhythmic sweep across the grass. The smell of my mother Susan's famous garlic bread drifted faintly through the warm afternoon air. It was the perfect picture of a happy, upper-middle-class American family. A family that had just secretly liquidated my only safety net to fund a vanity project. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy mahogany front door open and stepped inside. my rubber-soled hospital shoes squeaking sharply against the polished hardwood floors. Immediately, a bright, artificial glare hit my eyes. Coming from the sunken living room to my right was the blinding glow of a professional ring light. Positioned right in the center of the plush white sectional was my younger sister, Chloe. She was wearing a matching designer athleisure set that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, holding up a glossy travel brochure to the camera mounted on a tripod in front of her. "And you guys, I am literally vibrating right now," Chloe was saying, using that overly enthusiastic, high-pitched influencer voice she had perfected over the last 3 years. "The Dubai itinerary is officially locked in. First-class flights, a suite overlooking the Palm, the whole aesthetic is going to be insane. Honestly, massive shout-out to my dad. He got this massive, unexpected financial windfall and decided to invest in my brand. He told me, 'Chloe, you have so much potential. You deserve the world. So, get ready for the best content drop of the year.'" I stood in the archway, my hospital ID badge dangling from my scrub top, staring at the absolute absurdity of it all. She was broadcasting my stolen inheritance live to 3,000 teenagers on the internet. Without thinking, I dropped my car keys loudly onto the glass entryway table. The sharp clatter echoed through the house. Chloe jumped, her perfectly contoured face snapping toward me in deep annoyance. "Sarah, what the hell?" she hissed, covering the microphone of her phone with her hand. "I am live right now. You are ruining the audio. Can you not see the lighting setup?" I did not stop walking. I marched straight into the living room, stepping deliberately over the tangle of extension cords, and walked right into the bright circle of the ring light, planting myself firmly in the frame next to her. "Why do you not tell your followers where that financial windfall actually came from, Chloe?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, staring dead into the camera lens. "Why do you not tell them your father secretly sold the house our dead grandmother left to me, forged my signature, and handed you the cash so you could pretend to be rich on the internet?" Chloe's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. She scrambled backward on the sofa, her acrylic nails desperately clawing at her phone screen to end the broadcast. The screen went dark, but the silence that followed in the room was deafening. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe screamed, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Are you having a psychotic break? You just ruined my engagement metrics." Before I could answer, rapid footsteps pounded down the hallway. My father, Richard, burst into the living room, still wearing his tailored corporate suit trousers and a crisp button-down shirt. My mother, Susan, was trailing nervously right behind him, wiping her hands on an expensive linen dish towel. "Sarah, what is all this shouting?" Richard demanded, utilizing his deep, authoritative dad voice, the one he always used to immediately shut down any argument before it could even begin. "You are scaring your sister." I turned to face him, the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who had clapped at my nursing school graduation, the man who had, apparently, stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from me without losing a single wink of sleep. "There are strangers moving furniture into Grandma Eleanor's house," I said, my voice shaking with a dangerous mixture of exhaustion and rage. "They said they bought the property from you 3 weeks ago." Richard did not flinch. He did not look guilty. He did not break eye contact. Instead, his face softened into an expression of deep, patronizing concern. He took a step forward and reached out as if to place a comforting hand on my shoulder. I stepped back so fast I nearly knocked over the ring light. "Sweetheart, look at you," Richard murmured, his voice dropping to a gentle, soothing cadence that made my skin absolutely crawl. "You are completely exhausted. You just worked a 14-hour shift in the ER. You are delirious, Sarah. The stress of that hospital is clearly getting to your head. You are confused. You have not even been out to that old neighborhood in months." I stared at him, genuinely horrified. He was gaslighting me. He was standing in his own living room, staring his daughter right in the face and attempting to convince me that I was having a mental breakdown rather than admit what he had done. "I am not crazy, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, rigid register. "I was standing on the porch 10 minutes ago." I spoke to the buyer. He had the paperwork on a clipboard. He said he closed with you. Susan fluttered forward, her face tight with anxiety. Sarah, honey, please. Your father just wants what is best. You know Eleanor was getting a little senile toward the end. She did not understand the financial burden of a property like that. She made a mistake in the will, and your father he just corrected it. Corrected it? I repeated, the word tasting like battery acid in my mouth. By selling property that was legally entirely in my name? Seeing that his psychological trick was not going to work, Richard dropped the concerned father act entirely. His posture straightened, his jaw clenched, and the cold, calculating insurance executive emerged. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with pure, unfiltered entitlement. Do not use that dramatic tone with me in my own house, Sarah, he snapped, his voice suddenly hard. Let us look at the reality of the situation here. You are impossible to get a hold of. You are always at that hospital, working yourself to the bone for pennies. That house was a premium asset just sitting there, collecting dust, depreciating in value because you do not have the time or the money to maintain it properly. I own the house, I shouted, the dam finally breaking. It was not yours to manage. It is family wealth, Richard roared back, his face turning red. I am the head of this family, and I allocate resources where they are needed most. You already have a stable career. You have an apartment. You are surviving just fine. Your sister has a window of opportunity to build a massive brand, and she needed the capital to do it. You would never have agreed to help her because you have always been jealous of the attention she gets. So yes, I handled the adult business. I signed some papers to bypass the red tape. I kept the wealth inside the family. You should be thanking me for taking the tax burden off your shoulders. I looked over at Chloe. She was no longer crying. She was sitting back on the couch, arms crossed, nodding in agreement with our father. Yeah, Sarah, she chimed in, rolling her eyes. It is literally just wood and drywall. Do not be so materialistic. I need this Dubai trip to network with sponsors. You are being completely selfish right now. I stood in the center of the room, slowly looking at the three of them. My mother looking away in silent complicity. My sister glaring at me with arrogant entitlement. My father standing tall, utterly convinced that his authority gave him the right to rewrite the law. Then I looked at the wall behind them, a massive gallery wall filled with framed family photos. Chloe at her high school prom, Chloe holding her college acceptance letter, Chloe and my parents on a beach in Hawaii. There was not a single photograph of me on that wall. I had been erased from this family a long, long time ago. Today was just the day it became a financial reality. I realized with a chilling clarity that there was no point in screaming. There was no point in crying. You cannot appeal to the conscience of people who do not believe they have done anything wrong. You forged my legal signature to a real estate deed, I said quietly, the calmness returning to my voice. That is not allocating family resources, Dad. That is felony fraud. Richard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Oh, please, spare me the courtroom drama. You are not going to drag your own family into court over a misunderstanding. You do not have the money for a lawyer, and you certainly do not have the spine to send your father to jail. Now, go home, sleep off this temper tantrum, and we will talk about sending a few $1,000s to your savings account next week when you calm down. I looked at him for one long, final second. I did not say goodbye. I turned on my heel, picked up my car keys from the glass table, and walked out the front door, pulling it shut behind me with a decisive, heavy click. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. My hands were no longer shaking. They were perfectly, mechanically steady. I scrolled past the missed calls from the hospital, past the ignored messages from my landlord, and stopped on a name I had not dialed in over a year. Marcus. An old high school friend who had grown up to become one of the most aggressive real estate litigation attorneys in the city. The phone rang twice before he answered. Marcus, I said, staring at the pristine facade of my parents' house one last time. I need to hire you. and I need to know exactly how long it takes to freeze a bank account. Marcus's law firm was located on the 18th floor of a sleek glass building downtown, a place that smelled of expensive leather, fresh espresso, and ruthless efficiency. It was a sharp contrast to the chaotic, emotional war zone I had just walked out of. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from his massive oak desk, still wearing my wrinkled hospital scrubs, shivering slightly in the over-air-conditioned room. Marcus had not changed much since high school, except the messy skateboarder hair was gone, replaced by a sharp, expensive haircut and a tailored charcoal suit. He listened in complete silence as I laid out the entire nightmare, from the strangers in my grandmother's house to the sickening live stream happening in my parents' living room. When I finally finished, I expected him to offer a sympathetic sigh or a comforting platitude. Instead, his eyes went cold, shifting into full predator mode. He cracked his knuckles, turned to his massive dual monitor setup, and said, "Let us see exactly how sloppy your father was." His fingers flew across the keyboard. As a real estate litigator, Marcus had direct access to the county clerk's digital database. Within 60 seconds, he had pulled up the official transfer of deed for Grandma Eleanor's property. He clicked a button, and a scanned copy of the document filled the large screen facing me. There it was, the absolute proof of my father's betrayal, uploaded to a government server. "Look right here at the bottom," Marcus said, tapping the screen with a silver pen. "This is supposed to be your signature as the seller." I leaned in. My stomach dropped. The signature read, "Sarah Elizabeth Carter," in a looping cursive script, but it was completely wrong. The S was too wide, and the letters slanted heavily to the right. It was an older person's handwriting attempting to look young, but that was not the part that made my blood run cold. "Elizabeth is not my middle name," I whispered, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. "My middle name is Elaine." He forged my signature, and he did not even remember his own daughter's legal middle name. Marcus let out a low, dark chuckle. "That is the arrogance of a man who thinks he is untouchable. He did not even bother to check your birth certificate. He just winged it." But it gets worse. To close a real estate deal of this size without the seller physically present, he needed remote authorization. "Let us see what he submitted to the title company to bypass your physical presence." He clicked over to the supporting documents file. An email printout appeared on the screen. It was addressed to the escrow agent, stating that due to my demanding schedule as an emergency room nurse, I was granting full power of attorney to my father, Richard, to execute the sale on my behalf. The sender's address was Sarah Elaine Darn at a generic email provider. "I never wrote that," I said, my voice trembling with a fresh wave of anger. "I do not even have an account with that provider." "I know you did not," Marcus replied flatly, "because I already ran a background trace on this domain while you were talking. Sarah, this email address was created exactly 6 months ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months ago. That meant this was not a sudden crime of opportunity. This was not a desperate, split-second decision made because Chloe suddenly needed a vacation. My father had sat across from me at the Thanksgiving dinner table, asking me to pass the mashed potatoes, smiling at me, already knowing he was actively laying the groundwork to steal my inheritance. It was completely, chillingly premeditated. But how did he get it legally notarized? I asked, my mind racing. A notary public has to physically check an ID and witness the signature. Even if he forged the power of attorney, someone with a state license had to stamp it. Marcus smiled, but it was a vicious, humorless expression. That is the million-dollar question. And that is what is going to turn this from a civil lawsuit into a criminal indictment. Look at the notary stamp right next to your fake signature. He zoomed in on the circular black ink stamp at the bottom of the page. The text inside the seal read, "State of Washington, Notary Public, William Vance. My commission expires." I stopped breathing. The name echoed in my head. William Vance. "Oh my God," I gasped, pressing my hands over my mouth. "Uncle Bill." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" "He is not really my uncle," I explained, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He is my dad's golfing partner. They have been playing together at the country club every Sunday morning for 15 years. He is a retired insurance broker. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a look of grim satisfaction washing over his face. Bingo. A conspiracy. Your father didn't just fool a random notary, he brought an accomplice into the fold. This William Vance risked his state license and his freedom to do a solid for his golf buddy. Marcus picked up his desk phone and dialed a quick extension. Hey, David, he said to someone on the other line. I need you to pull up the security footage subpoena we requested for the Vance case last year. Yeah, the guy operates out of the strip mall on 4th Avenue. Access their parking lot cameras for the date of the deed transfer. Less than 10 minutes later, Marcus's paralegal emailed a compressed video file. Marcus dragged it onto the main screen and hit play. The footage was slightly grainy, stamped with the date of the property closing, which was exactly 3 weeks ago. It showed the parking lot outside William Vance's small notary office. A silver Mercedes pulled into an empty space. My father stepped out. He was wearing his favorite golf polo. He casually walked up to the trunk, popped it open, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. A moment later, William Vance walked out of the office building to meet him. They stood between the parked cars, completely out in the open. Watch this, Marcus instructed, pointing at the screen. In the video, my father handed the manila envelope to Vance. Vance opened it, glanced at the papers inside, and nodded. Then, my father reached into his pocket and pulled out something else. It looked like a smaller, much thicker envelope, the kind you get from a bank teller. He slipped it discreetly into Vance's hand. They shook hands, laughed at something, and patted each other on the back before parting ways. Cash, Marcus stated matter-of-factly. Your father bribed a state official in broad daylight to steal your house. We have the motive, we have the forged documents with the wrong middle name, we have the premeditated email timeline, and now we have the actual transaction caught on a security camera from the adjacent dry cleaners. I stared at the frozen frame of my father laughing with his accomplice. The man who had just told me I was delusional. The man who claimed he was just keeping the wealth in the family. He was nothing but a common thief in a tailored suit. Marcus turned to me, his expression deadly serious. Sarah, I need you to understand what happens next. If I file this, we are going nuclear. This is not just a demand letter for your money back. I am sending this evidence straight to the district attorney's office. Your father and his friend will face felony charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. They will be looking at real prison time. Are you absolutely prepared to do that to your own blood? I thought about my grandmother Eleanor. I thought about the restored clock sitting in my car, ticking in a vacuum. I thought about Chloe bragging to her internet followers, funded by the erasure of my future. I thought about my mother, standing by and watching it happen. If blood is the excuse they use to bleed me dry, I said, looking Marcus dead in the eye, then I am done being family. Freeze everything. Marcus gave a sharp nod. Let us go to war. But before we drop the legal bomb, I said, an idea forming in my mind, an idea so cold it surprised even me. I need to do something first. I need them to admit it, in front of witnesses, where they cannot backtrack or play the victim. Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What exactly are you planning, Sarah? I am going to throw a family dinner, I replied, a small dark smile touching my lips. My dad wanted to celebrate. It is time we give him a party he will never, ever forget. There is a very specific, intoxicating kind of clarity that washes over you when you finally stop trying to save people who are actively drowning you. For 29 years, I had been the peacemaker, the quiet daughter who absorbed the emotional blows so the rest of the family could maintain their perfect suburban illusion. But as I left Marcus's law office that afternoon, with a flash drive full of felony evidence burning a hole in my pocket, the peacemaker in me was completely dead. I sat in my car in the parking garage and drafted a text message to my mother. I kept the tone carefully compliant, exactly what she would expect to hear after my father had supposedly put me in my place. I wrote, "You were right. I was just exhausted and delirious from the hospital shift. I am sorry for causing a scene earlier. Let us do that Italian celebration dinner tonight. I will make a reservation at the private dining room at Moretti's. My treat. My mother replied within 3 minutes with a string of exclamation points, thrilled that her unruly daughter had finally fallen back into line. She had no idea that I was not just booking a table for 4. I also picked up the phone and called my mother's older sister, Aunt Martha. Martha was a no-nonsense retired high school principal who had always been the moral compass of our extended family. I also invited my Uncle David and my older cousin, Mark, who worked as a corporate auditor. I told them we were having a surprise family gathering to discuss Grandma Eleanor's legacy. At 7 o'clock that evening, I walked into the dimly lit, expensive private room at Moretti's. The table was covered in crisp white linen and glowing candlelight. Richard, Susan, and Chloe were already seated, looking incredibly smug. When Aunt Martha, Uncle David, and Mark walked in a few minutes later, my parents looked momentarily surprised, but Richard quickly masked it with his usual charming politician smile. He assumed I had invited the extended family to publicly apologize and kiss the ring. The first hour of the dinner was agonizing. I sat quietly, sipping ice water, watching my father hold court. He ordered 3 bottles of top-shelf Barolo wine. He aggressively bragged to Uncle David about his latest golf handicap. Chloe spent the entire appetizer course showing Cousin Mark pictures of the luxury resort in Dubai, loudly discussing how much her new convertible was going to cost, making sure everyone knew her father was funding her lavish lifestyle. I let them eat. I let them drink. I let them build their pedestal as high as it could possibly go, because the higher they climbed, the harder the concrete was going to feel when I pulled the floor out from under them. Just as the waiter cleared our main courses and brought out the dessert menus, Richard stood up. He picked up his crystal wine glass and tapped it with a silver spoon. The table fell silent. "I would like to propose a toast," Richard announced, his chest puffed out, his face flushed with expensive wine and pure arrogance. "To family, to staying together through thick and thin, and a special toast to my beautiful daughter, Chloe. Tomorrow, she flies out to begin a brand new chapter, funded by the smart financial planning of this family. We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart." Chloe beamed, raising her own glass. Aunt Martha smiled politely. Susan looked over at me, a silent warning in her eyes to behave. I slowly stood up, picking up my water glass. "I would actually like to add to that toast," I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through the warm atmosphere of the room like a scalpel. Richard looked at me benevolently. "Go ahead, Sarah." I reached down into my oversized leather tote bag sitting on the floor. I did not pull out a gift. I pulled out 3 thick, heavy manila folders. I dropped the first one directly onto Richard's dessert plate. I slid the second one across the table to Aunt Martha. I kept the third one in my hand. "I want to toast to the smart financial planning of this family," I said, looking dead into my father's eyes. Specifically, the planning that took place 6 months ago, when my father created a fake email address under the name Sarah Elaine RN. The smug smile instantly slid off Richard's face. The color began to drain from his cheeks. "What are you doing?" Susan hissed, glancing nervously at Aunt Martha, who was already frowning and putting on her reading glasses to open the folder. "I am just sharing the good news, Mom," I said brightly. "Aunt Martha, if you turn to page 3, you will see the official deed transfer for Grandma Eleanor's house, the house she left exclusively to me. You will notice that my father sold it 3 weeks ago to strangers. You will also notice my signature at the bottom. Only he was in such a rush to steal my inheritance, he signed it Sarah Elizabeth Carter." Aunt Martha gasped loudly. She looked up from the paper, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Richard," she breathed, "what is this?" Richard slammed his hands down on the table, the wine glasses rattling dangerously. "Sarah, stop this nonsense immediately," he barked, trying to use his deep voice of authority to regain control of the room. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of our guests. We discussed this today. I had your verbal authorization to manage the asset." "No, you did not," I replied, my voice rising just enough to drown him out. And you certainly did not have my authorization to hand a thick envelope of cash to William Vance in a strip mall parking lot so he would illegally notarize a forged power of attorney. Uncle David choked on his wine. Cousin Mark, the auditor, flipped rapidly through his copy of the folder, his eyes scanning the printed screenshots of the security camera footage Marcus had pulled. Uncle David looked at Richard with pure disgust. You bribed a notary, Richard. Are you out of your mind? That is a federal offense. It is fake. Chloe suddenly shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. She is just jealous. Dad, tell them she is making it up. I have my flight tomorrow. I am not dealing with this toxic energy. At that exact second, as if perfectly choreographed by the universe itself, Chloe's cell phone, which was sitting face up next to her plate, lit up with a bright red notification banner. Then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. The pinging sound echoed sharply in the tense silence of the dining room. Chloe snatched up the phone, her face twisting in confusion. What the hell? She muttered. She tapped the screen frantically. Why is my banking app sending me fraud alerts? She looked up, her perfectly manicured hands suddenly shaking. Dad? She said, her voice cracking with a sudden, very real panic. Dad, why does my checking account say 0? My Dubai resort deposit is supposed to clear in 3 hours. My credit cards are coming up as declined. Richard froze. He reached into his own tailored suit jacket, pulling out his phone. He stared at the screen, and I watched in real time as the last drop of arrogance completely left his body. His face turned an ashen, sickly gray. That would be the emergency ex parte injunction, I explained, leaning forward and resting my hands on the table. My lawyer filed it right before the courthouse closed at 5 o'clock. Every single bank account tied to your social security numbers, including joint accounts and accounts where you transferred the stolen funds, is officially frozen pending a criminal fraud investigation. You froze my accounts? Richard whispered, looking at me like he was staring at a ghost. You cannot do that. I have a mortgage, I have car payments. You should have thought about that before you stole my grandmother's house to buy your favorite child a vacation, I said softly. Chloe let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She threw her phone onto the table, tears instantly ruining her expensive makeup. My trip, she wailed, burying her face in her hands. You ruined my life. You psychotic bitch. You ruined my trip. Susan began to cry, reaching out to stroke Chloe's hair while staring at me with a look of absolute hatred. How could you do this to your own sister? Susan sobbed. To your own family? Aunt Martha abruptly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Do not you dare talk to her about family, Susan, Martha snapped, her voice trembling with righteous fury. Eleanor would be sick to her stomach if she were alive to see this. You two are disgusting. Do not ever call my house again. Martha threw her napkin onto her half-eaten dessert, grabbed Uncle David by the arm, and stormed out of the private room, closely followed by Cousin Mark, who gave my father a look of sheer pity before walking out. I stood there for a moment, looking at the wreckage I had just created. My father was staring blankly at his frozen bank alerts. My mother was sobbing into her linen napkin. My sister was having a full-blown meltdown over a canceled flight to Dubai. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto the table to cover my water and the tip. Enjoy the celebration, I said. I will see you in court. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the cool night air. For the first time in weeks, my lungs felt completely full. The trap had been sprung, but the real war was only just beginning, and they had absolutely no idea how far I was willing to go. The 72 hours following the explosive dinner at Moretti's were the quietest of my entire life. There were no angry text messages from my father, no passive-aggressive voicemails from my mother, and absolutely zero social media updates from my sister. According to Marcus, their newly retained defense attorney had likely terrified them into total silence, explaining that any communication with me could be construed as witness tampering or extortion. For 3 days, I went to my shifts at the hospital, came home to my apartment, and breathed in the strange, intoxicating air of absolute peace. But Chloe was an addict. She was not addicted to drugs or alcohol. She was addicted to the dopamine hit of internet validation, and expecting someone like her to stay quiet while her carefully curated digital life burned to the ground was completely unrealistic. On Tuesday morning, right as I was finishing up a grueling rotation in the trauma ward, my cell phone started vibrating off the break room table. It was not my family calling. It was a barrage of text messages from several younger nurses in my department, accompanied by links to a video platform. One text from a coworker named Jessica read, "Sarah, please tell me this is not your sister. This is going insanely viral." I sat down in a plastic chair, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and clicked the link. There was Chloe, sitting on the floor of her bedroom, bathed in the soft glow of her ring light. She was not wearing her usual designer brands. She was wearing an oversized, faded gray sweatshirt, her hair pulled back into a messy bun completely devoid of makeup. She had painted dark circles under her eyes to look exhausted and fragile. The video was titled, "Storytime: How My Toxic, Jealous Sister is Trying to Destroy Our Family." For the next 10 minutes, I watched my younger sister put on the performance of a lifetime. She wept on camera, wiping away invisible tears as she spun a masterful web of absolute lies. She told her hundreds of thousands of followers that I had always resented her success. She claimed that I was financially abusing our elderly father, demanding money he did not have, and that when he refused to fund my lavish city lifestyle, I hired a predatory lawyer to freeze their family bank accounts out of pure spite. "I had to cancel my dream trip to Dubai today," Chloe choked out, looking tragically into the lens. "Not because we cannot afford it, but because my sister locked my dad's hard-earned money in a legal battle just to see me cry. Please, you guys, send my family some positive energy. We are living in a nightmare." The video already had over 2 million views. The comment section was a sea of blue checkmarks and loyal followers sending her prayers and attacking the evil, jealous nurse sister. I forwarded the link to Marcus. He called me less than a minute later, chuckling darkly. "Do not panic, Sarah," he said calmly over the phone. "She just dug her own grave." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "She is turning the entire internet against me. Someone is going to figure out where I work." Marcus sighed. "Sarah, your sister's audience is largely made up of teenagers, yes. But her video just hit the main trending page. Do you know who lives on the trending page? Drama channels, true crime creators, internet sleuths who have absolutely nothing but free time and internet connections. Give it 3 hours." Marcus was off by an hour. It only took 2. By noon, the narrative had completely violently shifted. A prominent internet investigator with 3 million subscribers posted a response video. He did not yell or cry. He just shared his screen. "So, I decided to look into this tragic story," the investigator narrated in a dry, sarcastic tone. "And it turns out, civil lawsuits and criminal indictments are matters of public record. If you go to the county court database and search the family's last name, you find a very interesting docket. It seems Chloe's dad did not have his money frozen by a jealous sister. His accounts were seized by a federal judge because he is currently under criminal investigation for felony fraud, forgery, and bribing a state official to steal a house." The video then flashed the scanned copy of the forged deed, highlighting the blatantly incorrect middle name. It flashed the security camera still of my father handing the envelope of cash to the notary in the parking lot. "Oh, and that Dubai trip?" the narrator continued relentlessly. "Court records show it was funded by the stolen inheritance money. So, Chloe was not just crying over a canceled vacation. She was crying because the government confiscated her stolen goods." The internet backlash was swift, brutal, and absolute. Chloe's comment sections transformed from a support group into a digital firing squad. People were tagging the brands that sponsored her. Within 24 hours, 2 major cosmetics companies and a prominent athletic wear brand released public statements severing all ties with her, citing their strict morals and ethics clauses. She was bleeding tens of thousands of followers by the hour. That night, as I was cooking dinner in my small kitchen, my phone rang. The caller ID was a private number, but I knew exactly who it was. I accepted the call and put it on speaker. Sarah. My mother's voice was a ragged, breathless rasp. She sounded completely broken. "Hello, Susan," I said, chopping a bell pepper with rhythmic, precise cuts. "Please, Sarah, you have to stop this," she begged, her voice dissolving into frantic sobs. "Chloe has not left her room in 2 days. She is refusing to eat. The things people are saying to her online, they are telling her to go to prison. They are telling her horrible things. She told me she does not want to live anymore. She said she is going to swallow a bottle of pills if she loses her channel." The knife in my hand hovered in the air. For a split second, the old instinct, the deeply ingrained programming to drop everything and rescue my family from their own messes, flared up in my chest. Suicidal threats were the ultimate trump card. It was the heaviest, most terrifying weapon a mother could wield against her child. But then I remembered the live stream in the living room. I remembered Chloe rolling her eyes and calling me materialistic while spending money stolen from my grandmother's legacy. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, "if you genuinely believe Chloe is a danger to herself, you need to hang up this phone right now and dial 911. Request a psychiatric hold. They will take her to the emergency room where she will be evaluated by professionals. I can even give you the direct extension for the intake desk." There was a stunned, heavy silence on the line. "But Sarah, she just needs you to call off the lawyers. If you drop the lawsuit and issue a public statement saying it was a misunderstanding, her sponsors might come back. You are killing your sister over a stupid house." She was not calling to save Chloe's life. She was calling to save Chloe's brand. The emotional blackmail was just another calculated strategy to manipulate the outcome. I set the knife down on the cutting board and leaned over the phone. "I did not forge a federal document, Mom," I said, my voice hard as diamond. "I did not bribe a notary. I did not make a video lying to 2 million people. Chloe and Dad built this bomb, lit the fuse, and held it to their own chests. Now that it is exploding, you do not get to blame me for the shrapnel. Sarah, please, you are a monster," she screamed into the receiver. "If holding you all accountable makes me a monster, then I suggest you stay very far away from me," I replied. "Do not call this number again." I hit the red button, terminating the call, and blocked the number. My hands were perfectly steady. I picked up the knife and went back to chopping my vegetables. The guilt they had relied on for my entire life was completely gone, burned away by the bright, searing light of the truth. The trial was set to begin in exactly 2 weeks, and I was going to watch them face the judge with my eyes wide open. There is a distinct, unforgettable smell to a criminal courthouse. It is a sterile mixture of lemon floor wax, old paper, and cold, nervous sweat. Walking through those heavy oak doors on the morning of the trial, I did not feel terrified. I did not feel heartbroken. Wrapped in a sharp, tailored navy blazer that Marcus had advised me to wear, I felt like a surgeon stepping into the operating room to excise a massive, toxic tumor. The courtroom was vast and echoing. I sat at the prosecution table next to the district attorney and Marcus, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Across the aisle, sitting at the defense table, was the wreckage of my family. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years in the span of 2 weeks. His signature-tailored suits hung loosely on his frame, his face drawn and gray. Next to him sat William Vance, the corrupt notary, sweating so profusely he had to keep wiping his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. Susan sat in the gallery directly behind the defense rail, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. According to Marcus, her lawyer had strongly advised her to stay far away from the press cameras waiting outside, as she was completely unequipped to handle questions about her canceled sponsorships and stolen vacation funds. When the Honorable Judge Evelyn Davis, a woman with sharp, observant eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance, took the bench, the air in the room instantly grew heavy. Because the evidence Marcus and the DA had compiled was so overwhelmingly airtight, Richard and William's defense attorneys had practically begged for a plea deal. But to get leniency, the judge required a full, sworn allocution. They had to take the witness stand, admit their guilt on the public record, and explain exactly what they had done. William Vance went first. Trembling like a leaf, he admitted to accepting a $5,000 cash bribe in the strip mall parking lot to illegally stamp the forged power of attorney. He surrendered his notary license on the spot and pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud, hoping to avoid maximum prison time. Then it was my father's turn. Richard slowly walked up to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. But a man who has spent his entire life manipulating the truth does not suddenly find a moral compass just because he is under oath. The defense attorney stood up. Mr. Carter, can you explain to the court the circumstances that led you to falsify the deed to your daughter's property? I expected Richard to play the martyr. I expected him to use his old line about keeping the wealth in the family. Instead, Richard took a deep breath, looked nervously at the judge, and dropped a bomb that made the entire courtroom completely freeze. I was under immense, unbearable psychological pressure, Richard said, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. I knew it was wrong. But my wife, Susan, she was relentless. A loud, sharp gasp echoed from the gallery. I turned slightly. Susan was staring at her husband, her jaw unhinged in pure, unadulterated shock. Richard did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on his lawyer. Susan has always favored our youngest daughter, Chloe. When Chloe said she needed money to elevate her online career, Susan demanded I find a way to fund it. I told her we did not have the liquid cash. That is when Susan suggested we use Eleanor's house. She was the one who kept reminding me that Sarah was always at the hospital and would never notice. Susan created the fake email address. She drafted the power of attorney. She threatened to divorce me and take half my pension if I did not help her secure the funds for Chloe's trip. I only forged the signature because I was trying to save my marriage. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The bailiff had to shout for order. I sat back in my chair, utterly fascinated by the sheer, magnificent cowardice of the man on the stand. Of course he threw her under the bus. A man who would steal a house from his eldest child to buy a car for his youngest would not hesitate for a single second to sacrifice his wife to save his own skin. There is no loyalty among thieves, especially when the prison gates are swinging open. Susan stood up in the gallery, her face purple with rage. "You lying bastard!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the witness stand. "It was your idea. You said you were the head of the family. You set up the meeting with Bill." "Order in the court!" Judge Davis slammed her gavel down with a deafening crack. "Bailiff, remove that woman from my courtroom immediately." Two armed deputies grabbed Susan by the arms and dragged her, still screaming and sobbing, out into the marble hallway. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her hysterics. Richard sat on the stand, blinking rapidly, trying to look like the abused victim of a tyrannical wife. But Judge Davis was not buying a single second of his performance. She leaned over the heavy wooden bench, peering down at him over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was one of profound disgust. "Mr. Carter," Judge Davis said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "I have presided over this court for 22 years. I have seen armed robbers with more honor than you. You sat here today and attempted to use your own wife as a human shield, just after you used your daughter as an ATM." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "People like you believe that the word family is a magic spell that shields you from consequences," she continued, her words echoing loudly in the silent room. "You thought that because she shared your blood, she would suffer your abuse in silence. You did not protect your family, Mr. Carter. You cannibalized one child to feed the bottomless ego of the other, and today, the tab comes due." She picked up her paperwork, adjusting her glasses. "On the criminal charges of felony fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, I sentence William Vance to 3 years in a state correctional facility. Richard Carter, because you orchestrated the scheme and manipulated state records, I sentence you to 6 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 36 months. Richard's legs gave out. He slumped back into the witness chair, his face buried in his hands. The sound of his quiet, pathetic sobbing was the only noise in the room. Furthermore, the judge continued, turning her attention to the civil damages filed by Marcus. In the matter of restitution, the court orders the immediate unwinding of the fraudulent real estate transaction. The $200,000 currently frozen in the Carter family accounts will be returned to the innocent buyers. To satisfy the punitive damages awarded to Sarah Carter for extreme emotional distress and deliberate financial sabotage, I am ordering a lien placed on Richard and Susan Carter's primary residence. The property will be liquidated, and the proceeds will go directly to the plaintiff. My heart gave a massive, powerful thump. I looked over at Marcus. He gave me a slow, satisfied nod. They had stolen my home to pay for a vacation, and in return, the legal system had just taken theirs to pay for their crimes. As the bailiffs moved in to place Richard in handcuffs, taking him into custody directly from the courtroom, I stood up. I did not stay to watch him get dragged away in chains. I walked calmly down the center aisle, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and stepped out into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. The tumor was finally gone, and for the first time in my entire life, I was completely, beautifully free. It has been exactly 14 months since the heavy oak doors of that courtroom slammed shut, sealing my father's fate. They say time heals all wounds, but as an emergency room nurse, I know the truth about deep wounds. They do not just magically disappear, they leave thick, raised scars. But scars are not a sign of weakness. They are proof that you survived the bleeding. A lot has changed in a year. After the judge ordered the liquidation of my parents' suburban home, the reality of their actions finally crashed down on them. Susan and Chloe were forced to pack up their designer clothes and move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. Without Richard's corporate salary and with the court taking the bulk of the house sale to pay off my punitive damages and reimburse the innocent buyers, their lavish lifestyle evaporated overnight. I heard through Aunt Martha, who occasionally checks in on them out of a grim sense of duty, that Susan is now working the reception desk at a local dental clinic. And Chloe? The internet never forgets. After the viral exposure of her stolen vacation funds, her social media career flatlined permanently. She now works a 40-hour week folding sweaters at a fast fashion retail store in the mall. There are no more ring lights. There are no more first-class tickets to Dubai. As for me, I used the court-ordered restitution to officially buy back Grandma Eleanor's house from the innocent family who had been caught in the crossfire. The day I got the keys back, I walked into the empty living room, unwrapped the restored antique mantel clock, and placed it exactly where it belonged over the fireplace. The steady, rhythmic ticking filled the quiet house, sounding like a heartbeat coming back to life. But I did not just move back in and lock the doors. Eleanor had always intended for this house to be a safe haven, a place of refuge for people who were exhausted and overlooked. So I took the extra money from the punitive damages and renovated the entire east wing of the property. I transformed the 3 spare bedrooms into quiet, blackout-curtained sanctuaries. Now, when the younger nurses in my ER ward finish a grueling, traumatic 14-hour night shift and are too exhausted to drive all the way back to their noisy city apartments, they know they have a place to go. They come to my house. They sleep in a safe, quiet room. They wake up to fresh coffee and warm food. I turned the house my father tried to steal into a fortress of healing. I think Grandma Eleanor would have loved that. It was a Tuesday afternoon, my day off, when the final test arrived. I was sitting on the back porch, a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hands, watching the sunlight filter through the oak trees. My cell phone vibrated on the glass patio table. I looked down at the screen. It was an automated caller ID from the state correctional facility. It was a collect call from inmate Richard Carter, my father. For a long moment, I just stared at the glowing screen. I knew exactly what he wanted. He had been locked in a concrete cell for a year, stripped of his tailored suits, his golf clubs, and his arrogant authority. He was calling to beg for forgiveness. He was calling to manipulate my empathy, to tell me he was a changed man, to see if he still had a hook buried somewhere in my heart. He wanted the ultimate relief of hearing his daughter say, "It is okay, Dad. I forgive you." I reached out and picked up the phone. The device felt heavy in my hand. In the past, the old Sarah would have answered. She would have listened to his hollow apologies. She would have absorbed his pain to lessen her own guilt. But the old Sarah died the day she stood on the front porch and realized her family had sold her out for a convertible. I did not answer the phone. I did not yell at him. I did not demand an apology. I simply pressed the red button, sending the call directly to the dead air of a disconnected line. I set the phone face down on the table, picked up my cup of tea, and took a slow, deep breath of the fresh suburban air. The silence in the garden was absolutely beautiful. Society tells us that family is everything. We are conditioned to believe that blood is an unbreakable bond, a contract we sign at birth that obligates us to endure any level of toxicity, betrayal, and abuse. But that is a lie designed to keep victims trapped. Blood makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and basic human decency are what make you family. If someone is willing to forge your name, steal your future, and gaslight your reality just to fund their own vanity, they are not your family. They are a predator who just happens to share your last name. Sometimes the only way to win a toxic game is to completely refuse to play. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, build a beautiful life without them, and let them sit in the dark with the wreckage of their own choices. I am Sarah. I am an emergency room nurse. I am the proud owner of Eleanor's house, and I am finally, completely at peace. What about you? If you found out your own family put a price tag on your back, would you keep paying the toll, or would you burn the bridge and never look back?